It's good to be back. It's been a year since I've been here, and it's just zoomed by. So, yeah, my goal today is to share with you some of the fundamentals of esoteric astrology, which is a little bit different than traditional astrology in a couple of ways. Fundamentally, esoteric astrology is much more related to, or is useful to, people that have actually had an awakening, to people that have an awakening to their higher promptings. Traditional astrology is very good when it comes to understanding the personality dimension of life. But once a person has come to that time in life or that particular incarnation where there's a deeper something being felt, a higher kind of love being felt, a recognition of a kind of selfless, almost Christ-like love being felt, that's called the awakening. It's a big, big point in the evolutionary journey of the human soul over the vastness of time. And once that awakening occurs in one life or another, life is never the same. And it's at that point where we begin to see the usefulness of esoteric astrology. Because esoteric astrology has got a fundamental couple of goals. One is, in a certain sense, it's designed to help us understand how does the soul want to pattern the nature of consciousness in the life, and also how may the lower self get in the way and what can be done about it. So the premise behind this whole philosophy, or I should say the astrology portion of this philosophy, is that a person has recognized their own duality. They've recognized that higher and lower, and this particular type of astrology is trying to cater to the higher, the soul, and help you understand how to transform the lower, the personality, so that it becomes the rightful servant to the higher. And that's the goal. The soul is who you truly are, and ultimately your personality, its destiny is to just be the outer garment. Its destiny is to be the instrument through which the soul tries to interface in the world, and in the process of interfacing, make an uplifting contribution to something beyond yourself. Every human soul wants to serve, and yet we have to recognize it, and we have to understand how the personality needs to conform to its expectations. So the goal tonight is kind of twofold. I'm going to do a PowerPoint with you today, and the first few slides are just going to be showing you a couple major distinctions between esoteric astrology and traditional astrology. And then I'm going to take you on a journey, and I'm going to take you through the 12 signs of the zodiac, and I'm going to give you a higher understanding of each of these signs. And hopefully, for those of you who feel life is really a spiritual journey, hopefully you'll get some insights into your own journey itself. That's my goal. Sound okay? Okay, so let's begin. Esoteric astrology versus personal or traditional. So esoteric astrology focuses on the purpose of the soul and its struggle to transform the personality. But personal astrology focuses on the personality development and its expression. Okay? Next. Because the soul is found on the abstract plane of mind, an esoteric astrologer will interpret a chart abstractly. Abstractly. And so you will see, as I go through this, you will see that the language I use will have a more abstract quality to it, because that's why the whole philosophy is abstract. Those of you who have studied Blavatsky, and those you know it's very abstract, but there's a reason for that. Because your causal body, your soul, is found on the abstract mental plane, the higher mental plane. And so the more we exercise and develop our abstract consciousness, the more you're in the neighborhood of the soul. Personal astrologers tend to interpret a chart concretely, at least comparatively speaking. In esoteric astrology, the rising sign holds the clue to the soul's incarnational intention. It's an important concept. In traditional astrology, the rising sign, which is the sign that's cresting at the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth, and it's really important in traditional astrology, but when a person has had the awakening, has a deeper sense of their soul call, then the rising sign has a higher meaning, as suggested here. You see, and let me just show you the bottom part. Of the personal astrology, the rising sign reveals the nature of persona and its expression. In other words, the rising sign to traditional astrologers is that it represents appearance, persona, how you are seen in the world, or how you would like to be seen. Esoteric astrology says, well, yes, until you wake up to that higher prompting. And then this higher understanding of the rising sign is really crucial. You see, the reason for that is that this is the sign that's in the east, and the east is the direction of spirit, and it's rising. So it can symbolize the soul's rising intention. In a way, it's your soul sign. Probably more accurate, though, if I were to say it this way, if you could live the higher qualities of your rising sign, well, that's like a gate right to the soul. So if you don't know your rising sign, I encourage you to learn what it is, okay? Next. Esoteric astrology uses 3 levels of ruling planets for each sign. From this, the spiritual dimension of the sign can be revealed. Now, this is an aspect that there's no way I could fully get into this tonight, but I'll just say this, that I don't know if you know what rulers are. Curious, how many of you are really familiar with astrology? I'm just kind of want to get a feel for it. Okay. Well, you know that every sign of the zodiac has a planet that rules it, which means represents it. And yet, traditional astrology has a tier of rulers that are useful and correct as it pertains to the consciousness of the personality. But there's a higher tier of rulers, and that those planets are often different than the traditional. And it says that it is suggested that those planets hold the soulful vibration associated with that sign. You see, one of the big differences between traditional and esoteric is that traditional astrology has a more monolithic approach, but esoteric astrology takes into account that people are actually at different levels of consciousness, and that has to be included in the nature of the interpretation. 2 people could have exactly the same chart. One is a very young soul and one is a very old soul, and yet often people kind of interpret it the same, but it's far from the same. And that's one of the beauties of esoteric astrology. It takes into consideration the hierarchical dimensions of evolution itself. Okay? So here it is. Personal astrology uses only the traditional rulers. These are useful, but only as it pertains to the personality, not the soul. Okay? All right, a couple more. Esoteric astrology considers the moon to be the major liability of a person's chart, particularly after the age of 35. I'm looking at your faces. Many of you are probably in that category. I know I am too. Whereas traditional astrology, personal astrology, considers the moon as the symbol of a person's emotional tendencies and instinctual patterns. And that's true. It is. But many times, to the person on the path, the moon can represent instinctual patterns that can actually defeat the soul from being more effective in the life. It's because it's as if the soul, because it's representing instinctual consciousness, the soul can have difficulty getting a grip on it. So one of the great challenges of evolution is to handle the problem of the moon in your chart. And the general rule of thumb is, for wherever the moon is found, is that whatever sign it's in, and assuming you're on the path, it either means that there's going to be too much of that energy woven into the instinctual dimension of consciousness, or the opposite, not enough of it. Or the third possibility, it's unstable. Sometimes too much, sometimes not enough, so it swings back and forth. Okay? Okay. All right, so we're going to start with Aries. Now, as I go through these, I'm going to show you the deep meaning of Aries, the deeper meaning of Aries, and then or the signs, and then I'm going to give you a sacred mantra for each of the signs of the zodiac. So when you think of Aries, let me go back for a minute. When you think of Aries, the typical way we think of that sign is that it's a powerful sign, it's a sign that has a lot of fire in it, it's the kind of the warrior on the march. Mars is the traditional ruler, Mars is the lord or god of war, right? And all of that's true. But when we look at it from a deeper perspective, Aries is one of the first ray signs. Now, I don't know if you folks know what the 7 rays are, but of each of the 7 rays, every ray finds expression through 3 signs of the zodiac. And in the case of the first ray, which is called the ray of will and power, one of the signs that it finds its access point is indeed Aries. And Aries is this: the will to initiate the archetypes of God on behalf of humanity's betterment. You see, Aries is a sign that when it's affecting the life of a disciple, oh, I better define my words here. When I use the word disciple, I don't mean it in the traditional way. I don't mean it in the sense of, oh, follow that guru and that sort of thing. No, what I mean is to be a disciple of your own soul. To be a disciple of your own higher promptings, that's discipleship. I mean, there's also larger understandings of discipleship. You know, it is said that the greatest master you could ever follow is often the one least followed. And that's your own higher consciousness, the soul within you, okay? So when you hear me use the word disciple, that's what I mean, okay? Aries sees and Aries tries to shape into human consciousness the ability to sense the new paradigms emerging on humanity's horizon, and to be a voice in support of those new and emerging paradigms. So it's a futuristic sign. It's a pioneering sign. And it's very strong. It's the first sign of Zodiac, very strong because it has to be strong. If you're an Aries individual who's on the path and you sense new ideas and you want to bring them forward, you got to be strong because humanity is governed by inertia. And if you're going to initiate the new, it takes a lot of power to move something into the field of inertia. So that's why Aries is so strong, normally, unless other things in the chart compromise that. So as I go through these 12, please understand I'm talking about them in their kind of pure sense. Realize that a chart is very complex and there's many, many other variables that can modify things, but I just want you to understand the fundamentals on a higher level of the signs themselves, okay? Now, as I said, every sign of the zodiac has a sacred mantra that I'm going to share with you. Now, this is a sentence in English, and it's said to be the soul speaking in this sign. And I'm going to show it to you here, but I always like to preface this, the Aries one, that Aries is so strong that, let's put it this way, I'm glad you're sitting, okay? So here's the soul speaking in Aries. I come forth, and from the plane of mind, I rule. I come forth, and from the plane of mind, I rule. But let me explain that, because if you can misinterpret this very easy. I'm going to embellish it for clarity. I, my higher consciousness, I, the best in me, I, the soul itself, come forth, and from the power of my mind, I rule my creative expression. That's what Aries is really about. It has nothing to do with ruling people. It's an insistence on doing what you must do to bring forth the new idea without distraction. But it requires that you understand how to use your mind right, because Mars is a traditional ruler, and Mars is passion. Mars is the energy that rules the solar plexus. And before you're on the path and you're in Aries, Mars is the fuel that you use to bring forth the new. And by the way, a couple years ago, I learned something really interesting about rams. I mean, the real animal. Did you know that in real life they're nearly blind? I thought, well, that's telling. Blind charging forward without right sight, without right thought. And so a negative side of Aries is sort of unnecessary disruptions in the process. Well, until you start to live from its higher nature, because its higher ruler is not Mars. Its higher ruler is Mercury. And Mercury is the messenger of the gods. In Greek mythology, Mercury is Hermes. And so it's the power of thought itself that you want to use to move something forward. Instead of using your astrality, your emotions, to fuel the expression, you use the very power inherent in the new idea itself as your motivating force for getting something in the world. Okay, I'm gonna... I just realized that because this PowerPoint is being played on a different system, this is supposed to be the glyph for the sign, but apparently the computer that we're using here doesn't have the font for that. So I apologize for the cue here. I just noticed it now. So disregard these symbols because obviously it's not going to pick it up correctly. Okay, let's go to Taurus. I'm curious, any Taurians in here? Okay. All right. Well, you know, when you think of Taurus, you usually think of, you know, groundedness. It's an earth sign. There's a sense of stability. There's a sense of dependability, loyalty, sometimes stubbornness, okay. But kind of a persevering steadiness. But here's the higher meaning of Taurus. The desire to reveal the light of divinity hidden within form. You see, in the ancient literature, Taurus has been called the sign of the light bringer, friends, the light bringer. But it's not light in the way you think. It has everything to do spiritually with building as a function of revelation. You know, many artists come out of Taurus. Taurus is a fourth ray sign, and the fourth ray, one of the attributes of the fourth ray is beauty. That's why Taurus, even in traditional astrology, Taurus rules gardens. Taurus rules ecosystems. I mean, it's often in May, and May is when everything is coming to life. You can kind of understand why Taurus is connected to beauty. But on this higher level, Taurus has to do with revealing, revelation. Let me use an example, just to highlight this. And I think I will use an artist. It's a good way of doing this. Over here we have an image on the wall here in this tapestry, and it's beautiful. Now, when you look at a visual image like this, everything you see, all of the shapes, all the colors, the lines, all of that is just a bunch of forms. Just a bunch of forms. But when forms are rightly related to each other, something comes out of that painting or that tapestry that we call beauty. See, beauty is actually something that arises through the right relationship of form. It's in relating things where beauty comes forward. And that's the underlying principle of Taurus. It has to do with construction to reveal. Now, eventually, the Taurian artist, if they are artists, the Taurian artist, discovers something really amazing. They discover that the painting they just created, that painting is actually not creating the beauty. Instead, they realize that the beauty pre-exists the painting, and that the assembly of form is actually just to reveal that which already is. It's already there. It's intuited. And it's not just artists. I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine, he lives in, he's very Taurian, clearly on the path. He's a double Taurian, actually. And he doesn't have an artistic bone in his body. I think a stick man would be challenging for him, to be honest with you. Actually, it'd be challenging for me, too. But he's a man that he works in this company in LA, and he's supervising a group of people in a department, and he's always asking himself, he's watching the flow of the work in the environment, and he's always asking himself, what if we were to simplify this task, and maybe eliminate this, and maybe merge these tasks, we could make it all more efficient. It's the same thing. Because when we talk about Taurus and the assembly of form, don't confine your thinking to just physical form. how you do something is a form. And in his case, he arranges procedures within a company, and from that, the light of efficiency is revealed to others. Or it's the teacher who wants to convey ideas to a student and has to use forms, called words, to deliver that. And if the construction of that language is done poorly, it falls on deaf ears. But done well, it's an enlightened realization. That's Taurus. That's Taurus. Taurus is also the sign most associated with the opening of the third eye. You've heard the expression, hitting the bull's eye, have you not? We think that's an archery term, but it's actually much older. It's a reference to the bull in the sky. If you look at the old paintings of the bull in the Middle Ages, it was always a single eye, either a single eye or a profile, but there's this long history of the eye of the bull, the eye of vision, the eye of God. Taurus is really about a deeper way of looking. In fact, the mantra for it addresses this very thing. Let's take a look. The soul says this, I see, and when the eye is opened, all is illumined. Here, I see. Okay? You folks following me okay? You tracking all of this?
Yes.
Okay? All right, do we have any Gemini people in here?
What is the ruler of Taurus?
The traditional ruler, of course, is Venus, right? The esoteric ruler, it's going to surprise you, Vulcan. Vulcan. Remember, live long and prosper? Vulcan was said to be the blacksmith of the gods in mythology. And Vulcan in esoteric astrology is actually believed to exist. It is said to be within the orbit of Mercury, within 8 degrees of the sun, either way. But in etheric substance, it hasn't made the dense physical level yet. And Vulcan would take in mythology, Vulcan would take raw matter and with power and fire and strength, shape it into something luminous and useful. Form that reveals. Same idea. Okay? All right. Gemini people again? Okay. Some of you go like this. What does that mean? Okay. All right. So when you think of Gemini, of course, you often they talk about two sides of the personality, right? Two sides of the personality. But you see, when you wake up in Gemini, it's not two sides of the personality anymore. That's not the duality. It shifts from two parts of the personality to the soul and the personality. There's you might say it verticalizes. Before you're on the path, yeah, I got two sides of my personality, but then it shifts, and now it's the higher self and the lower self. And Gemini is also associated with communications. You and I are doing a Gemini thing right now. This camera is also Gemini. The internet's Gemini. But when you're on the path and waking up, it's all about vertical communications. It's about the communications between the soul and the personality. That's actually the higher understanding of of Gemini. Let me show you. The relating of the pairs of opposites and the building of the Antakarana. Now, some of you may know what Antakarana is, but let me explain. Antakarana is a Sanskrit word, and it's said to be the communication bridge that is between the soul and the personality. And yet this bridge does not exist naturally. It has to be built. And it's built when three things are woven into the fabric of your life. One, heartfelt service to humanity, a real Christ-like commitment to love and serve. Two, study, building your higher mind. And three, meditation. Those are called the three pillars. And why this is so important is because we are told in the ancient literature that Gemini rules the construction of the Antakarana. Doesn't mean that if you don't have Gemini in your chart, you can't build it. No. because Gemini has a ruling planet. It has a higher and lower ruling planet, and that planet is someplace in your chart. So in a way, one thing you need to know about astrology is, in a certain sense, all the signs of the zodiac are related to you in some way, shape, or form, because all of their representatives are in the zodiac in your chart somewhere, okay? So it's a very, very important, and the key to success when you're on the path in Gemini is to learn to quiet the lower self in order to hear the faint whispers of the soul. Because you see, the soul speaks in faint intuitive whispers. It's all about getting the lower self quiet, which, by the way, is very difficult for Gemini, because it's a mutable sign and the mind wants to go all over the place, and that's the great irony. There's a great irony about Gemini. I always think about this, you know. It's like Gemini people would probably benefit most from meditation, and yet they're the least likely to meditate. But if you can really quiet it down, it's a fantastic sign. Here's the mantra for it. I see my other self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. Let me embellish it for you for clarity. This is the soul speaking in Gemini. I see that busy personality down there, and in the waning of it, which is the quieting of it, I grow and I glow. You see? It's kind of beautiful in a way, isn't it? I think, anyway. The next sign, Cancer. Oh, I'm glad you're keeping me on track, lady. This is good. Okay, the ruler. The traditional ruler is Mercury, right? The esoteric ruler is Venus. Venus. Because Venus, on a higher level, it's all about learning that to think with your heart and to feel with your mind, a reverse pattern. I could really go into it. Okay, now let's just, I gotta keep my pace here, but I'll just say this really quickly. Planets are living things, friends. Planets are beings. It's not just this ball of dirt out there. It's a being, it's alive. Just like the earth is a being, it's a god to us. And just as the earth has a soul and a personality, so too does Venus. In fact, Venus is more evolved than our earth. And each of those planetary lives out there, their soul and personality are governed by rays. So when you think of Venus, what do you normally think of? What word would come to mind normally?
Love.
Love. What ray is love most associated with? Second ray. Quite right. Venus is second ray in its personality nature, but not its soul nature. The soul of Venus is actually fifth ray. Fifth ray. And that's the ray of higher mind. Higher mind. So this is a very complex thing, and I could take you down a lot of roads here, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of understanding that when we think about planets and their influence, we also have to think about their higher influence and their lower influence, okay? Okay, so on to the next sign. Any Cancerians in here, by the way? Aha, okay. A few of you. It's nice that you decided to leave the house and come and join us today. Here's Cancer. Building the foundations of life through the warmth of nurturing love. You see, Cancer is an amazing sign when you really get to the deeper part of it. You know, traditionally it's associated with the home and the nest and security, you know, and all. There's a lot of truth to that, all of that. But let me just say that, to start, is that Cancer is one of the most Christ-filled signs of the zodiac. Personally, I would put Cancer and Pisces as the most Christ-filled. Although the Christ principle manifests differently between those two signs. And in Cancer, that Christ principle, it manifests as nurturing, wise, supportive love. And again, I'm talking about it in its purity without all of the other things that add or flavor and differences and stuff. So in its own right, It's that way. And when you're on the path, one of the big things in Cancer that you have to understand is that if Cancer is about the home, well then, what you really discover is you got to redefine what the home is. And the big message for Cancer is this: the home, in the truest sense, is not the four walls you live in. Instead, it's important for the Cancerian to see the entirety of his or her life as if it were their home, the wholeness of the life. And that every department of the life, career, friendships, relationships, interests, all of those are like larger rooms in this larger home that is the disciple's life. And always the big question in Cancer is how well lit are those rooms? Or are any of the light bulbs getting a bit dim? Because Cancer, in a spiritual sense, without any other influence, Cancer is a diffuse sign. It's not a goal-oriented sign. It's a sign that says, be the best you can be in every situation. Make the best of you radiate through every window of every one of those larger rooms of life, you see? It's an amazing sign when you rise to the occasion. And one of the key words is the word foundation. You see, signs of the zodiac, there's so much that we can say, but one of them is they often represent certain spiritual principles. And Cancer, one of the main spiritual principles that it conveys is the so-called principle of foundations. I mean, if you think about it, if it's the sign of the mother, well, mother's pretty foundational to life. If it's a sign of the home, well, home is pretty foundational to life. So on a deeper level, it's the nature of foundation. So a Cancerian disciple is somebody who should see their service to humanity, to see it as a role to play as a foundation upon which others can thrive and grow because your loving wisdom is a foundation to them. You see? Let me show you the mantra. I build a lighted house, and therein dwell. I build a lighted house, and therein dwell. And that's the house of one's life. Okay? So much more I could say, but I can't. Got to keep my pace. Let's go to the next sign. Oh, she is good. She is good. She is good. And keep doing that, because normally this is a 2-hour session, but I've been told I've got to really compress it for time reasons. But I will do these rulers. Traditional ruler is the moon. Esoteric ruler is Neptune. Neptune. And Neptune, in the highest sense, Neptune is the Christ. If you want to find the Christ in your chart from a planetary spectrum, perspective, look to Neptune. A lot of people talk about Neptune in a negative way. Makes you foggy, leads to depression and all of that. But that's only the lower negative effects when it's working through an imperfect instrument. But Neptune on a higher level is pure, unfettered, Christ-like compassion. So it's its higher ruler, okay? Next, Leo, esoteric theme. The will to be the authentic self and the power to convey illumination. Any Leo people in here? Just 2? What's the odds of that? 2, okay. Well, when you think of Leo, you usually think of somebody that is kind of out there, kind of extroverted. You usually think of Leo as the, in traditional, there's an old joke about Leo, there's an old joke. The joke goes like this: you can always tell a Leo, but you can't tell him much, And I have to be honest with you, I'm a Leo, so I have a right to tell the joke, okay? But we are told that the first ray, it's another first ray sign, and it brings in the will in 3 ways, spiritually. The first is the so-called will to be, the will to be. You see, in the deepest sense, friends, Leo is all about finding yourself. Every Leo person should be asking the question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And of course, that's a working hypothesis. I mean, if you were to be asked that question 10 years ago, you'd probably answer it a bit different than you would now, you see? And so one of the big interesting things about Leo is that, you know, it's symbolized by the lion, right? The lion. But here's the big surprise. There's actually 2 lions in Leo and not 1. 2 lions. The traditional lion is the lion as the self as personality, where the higher, the other lion, is the self as soul with a capital S. Both are selves. Both are centers of identity. The lower lion, you know, that's the lion that most astrologers will attend to. You know, when the lower lion loves the limelight, what's really going on there? That's really the personality that's saying to itself, hey, this must be who I am because this is what everybody loves. But the higher lion, that self doesn't need accolades from the environment to validate itself. The higher lion is all about standing in one's authenticity, without inflation, which would be egoism, or deflation, which is diminished self-esteem. It's to stand in what is. What is. In fact, the mantra for it is here. I am that, and that am I. It's the shortest of the 12, short and to the point. But let me embellish it for you. I am that quiet point of beingness deep within, and that's who I am. But as I said, it brings the will energy in 3 ways. The second way is the so-called will to lead. Leo is one of the leadership signs. Many Leos are natural leaders. Not all, by the way, so I'm making broad generalizations, but many are good leaders, naturally. And the other is the so-called will to illumine, the will to illumine. You see, Leo is also one of the teaching signs, friends, one of the teaching signs. Quiz question. What object in the sky rules Leo? The sun. Well, so it may have something to do with bringing light to things, you see? And to now address what I know she's going to ask me, Leo is one of the signs, there's only a couple of them like this, where the ruler is the same on the higher and the lower. It is also the sun. It is also the sun. Okay? You know, think about it. The sun is the center of our solar system. It's the centralizing force for the life of our solar logos. You know, the whole solar system is also an entity in its totality. And even though we look at the Earth and say that's a god, the solar logos is nature to planets. Those are chakras within it. So our planet is a chakra within the larger entity. But that solar logos, that sun, is the center power for the whole solar system. And when we say to ourselves, I want to find myself, what I'm really saying is I want to find my center. It kind of makes sense that the sun would be the symbol of it. Okay? Let's go on to Virgo. Before I do, when you think of Virgo, you usually think of things like, oh wait, how many Virgos are in here? Be precise. Okay, we got a few Virgos. So usually Virgos associated with meticulous detail, attention to detail, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, hard work before play, sometimes perfectionistic tendencies, right? Well, there's truth to all of that to some extent. But here's the higher meaning of it, and then I'm going to explain it. This one's kind of harder to explain, but here it is. The gestation of the Christ principle within the womb of substance. Let me explain. In this philosophy, it's understood that who you really are is the soul. That's your real self. And that your soul, or I should say an aspect of your soul, is incarnate into 3 layers of intelligent substance. The physical dimension, the emotional dimension, and the mental dimension. Now, the consciousness of those 3 layers is what we call personality. Some people might call it ego, okay? Now, when you're born in Virgo, or you have it as your rising sign, It's important to see your whole personality as if it were a womb, and that the soul, which is the Christ in you, is in gestation within that womb. And the more that womb can be well tended to, cared for, and purified, the more likely the soul can birth itself through that form in service to humanity's upliftment. You see, so Virgo in the deep spiritual sense is the great sign of purification. It has everything to do with purifying the form dimension of life so that a higher and wiser part of you is more effectively can be expressed through that form. You with me still? I mean, even the word Virgo comes from the root word virgin, to be pure, to be pure. Here's the mantra for it. This one, by the way, is the most poetic of the 12. I am the mother and the child. I, God, I matter, am. This one's going to take some explanation. And you know, when I work with this, I always find that the one thing about talking about Virgo is that I have to take you to cosmos for a minute to get you to get this, okay? So bear with me as I take you to the big picture. One of the most amazing and important concepts in the esoteric philosophy and theosophy is that in the ultimate sense, there's only one thing, one existence, one beingness. Some people call it God, other people call it Brahma, other people call it universal intelligence. Often we might call it Parabrahman, or often simply the one life. Now in the esoteric philosophy, there's a view that's quite different than the Abrahamic theologies of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism when it comes to the question of the creator and that which is created. The general bias of the Western theologies is that there's a God out there and there's creation, so it's God and creation. But in esotericism, that's not the way it's understood. It's not understood as God and creation, it's understood as God as creation. God as creation. And God as creation is a whole different paradigm for understanding you and your relationship to the greater life. You see, you're a ray, you're a beam of light from that one life. And in a way, the whole path is to realize and prove it that you are the divinity you seek. You are the divinity you seek. So that's a context now for me to explain this mantra, okay? Now as that one life incarnates the one becoming the many, we are given to understand that it first becomes the two before it becomes the many. And you could, to make it simple, one side is the cosmic father and the other is the cosmic mother. In Hinduism, the cosmic father is called Purusha, and the cosmic mother is called Mula Prakriti. But what's so interesting is that it is believed that those two streams each carry different attributes of the one life. So for instance, the cosmic father holds the deep sense of purpose and will of the one life, while the cosmic mother holds the vibration of the innate intelligence, the knowingness of the one life. I kind of have a joke sometimes when I do a whole workshop on cosmology. The joke is, you know, the cosmic father, the cosmic father knows what to do but doesn't know how to do it. The cosmic mother knows how to do it but doesn't know what to do. Okay. And when we talk about the mother, that cosmic mother is interesting because all the planes of consciousness are her. All of them. Every plane of consciousness is made up of intelligent substance, and the inherent intelligence in that substance is her. If I cut my hand, it heals itself. I didn't do a thing. It heals itself. That's an intelligence. That's her. If I have an emotion, it could be a base emotion, or it could be a lofty emotion. but I'm experiencing the intelligence of emotional substances within my emotional body. That's her. If I have a thought, I'm experiencing the assembly of mental substance, and the product of that assembly is the thought itself. That's her. Wisdom, that's her. Intuition, that's her. That's how pervasive the Cosmic Mother is. Okay, now, back to the mantra. So, I am the mother and the child. The Virgo individual, it's really important that they have this sense of reverence for their form nature, mental, emotional, and physical. The very thing that is the personality is made up of three types of intelligence: the physical, the emotional, mental. And there's a kind of honoring and reverence to it, recognizing that in its essence, it too is sacred, and it's part of the Cosmic Mother. So there's a sense of recognizing, honoring, and somewhat identifying with the Cosmic Mother, but also the child. Now, what's the child? The soul, the Christ in you. I am the mother and the child. I, God, meaning I, the soul, I, matter, am. So Virgo has everything to do with honoring the sacredness of your own duality, the sacredness of your form nature, mental, emotional, and physical, and the sacredness of that higher part of you that wants to find expression through that form. And through the purification of the one, the other can come forth unencumbered in service to human betterment. That's Virgo. Probably a little deeper than you read in the newspaper, I suspect. And from a service perspective, it means that the Virgo individual should see themselves as an agent of good form, to try to support good form that supports more sacredness of life coming through that form. In other people, for instance, not just yourself. It's not surprising that Virgo, even mainstream, is the sign most associated with the healing profession. All healing, whether it's mainstream medicine or alternative, is Virgo. I mean, think about it. What does a doctor want to do? They want to help you get the form right so that you can more joyously live and express through that form. Okay. Libra, rulers. Mercury is a traditional ruler. And believe it or not, the moon is the esoteric ruler. And I'm a little cautious here because I will just say this, that it is said that the moon is veiling another planet, and that's Vulcan again. Vulcan again. So we saw Vulcan as a sacred influence in Taurus, which had to do with creating good form in order to reveal something. Now we see Vulcan again working through a higher level of the moon to create good form in support of purification. Okay? Okay. Any Librans in here? Kind of curious. Okay, just a couple. Okay. So when you think of Libra, you usually think of, balance, harmony. It's been connected to justice and partnership, by the way. It's the great sign of relationship. But on a higher level, let's look at it. The harmonization of duality through the establishment of right relationship. You see, so often when we talk about relationship in a Libra context, we're often thinking about it as interpersonal. But actually, that's just a small part of it. You see, Libra is all about the principle of relationship. And the principle of relationship is a much bigger thing than just interpersonal relationship. Because you see, the Libran individual on the path should be looking out at their lives and saying, what is the right relationship that I should have with everything I interface with? What is the right relationship with my career? What is the right relationship to have with my friendships, with my interests, with my partner, with Mother Nature, with the chair I'm sitting on? Think about it. Everything is a relational question from a certain point of view. There's you, the perceiver, and there's that which you perceive. And Libra is an energetic influence, a living influence in cosmos, in the zodiac, that tries to help an individual perceive right fit. What is the right fit to have here? Okay? And now there's two levels of it too that I always like to share. There's that part of it, and then there's another part that has to do with right relationship within oneself. So for instance, what is the right relationship between the masculine and feminine energies? What is the right relationship between happiness and sadness? Between the mind and the heart? Between action and inaction? Between the soul and the personality? These are deep, profound, important questions about human consciousness itself. So Libra has a lot to do with both the question of right relationship externally and right relationship internally. Okay? And here's its mantra. I choose the way that leads between the two great lines of force. You see, Libra is the scales. And the middle of the scales is the fulcrum point. And the two great lines of force is any duality the Libran individual is facing. Whether it's the duality of the heart and the head, whether it's the duality of your personal life and your spiritual life, whatever duality you're faced with a question, Libra says, I choose the way that leads between the two great lines of force. It's not surprising, therefore, that Libra is one of the signs that rules the religion of Buddhism. Two signs of the zodiac rule the religion of Buddhism. One is Taurus, and the other is Libra. You know, Taurus, the Buddha was born in Taurus. He was actually enlightened in Taurus, and he even died in Taurus. And the most sacred full moon is the Taurian full moon, which is called the Wesak moon. Are you familiar with that? That's always the Taurian full moon. And Taurus, on a lower level, on a traditional level, is about desire, really. Taurus is about acquisition, money, comfort. But on a higher level, it's about transformation of desire, leading to spiritual aspiration, which then in turn leads to illumined living. But what the Buddha said was, he said, all suffering is due to desire. That's what he said. And then he said, the solution to all suffering in the world and the way to enlightenment is to, quote, walk the noble middle path. You've heard this, the noble middle path. Libra. I choose the way that leads between the two great lines of force, you see? You can see the connection. Okay. Scorpio, where are they? Aha. Oh, rulers. Oh, I thought you were saying you were Scorpio. No, okay. So the rulers, okay, this is going to be a tricky one to share with you. The tradition of Venus, right? The esoteric or the higher is Uranus. And it's kind of surprising unless you really understand why. The reason is this, and without getting too deep into this, when the soul evolves over the vastness of time and incarnates hundreds of times, before you wake up, it is said that your soul is involuting into form, into substance. Meaning, it's like you're getting deeper into materiality and identification with form. And I have this strange image that I always picture of, it's like, I think of a bottle of wine and a cork and a corkscrew. You're incarnating and you're penetrating into form, okay? And then what happens is, in some incarnation, it is said that the individual will have become a strong ego and have done it all, would have satiated all things, would have experienced wealth, would have achieved every kind of ego gratification thing possible, and yet when they get to that point, there's still this realization, something's still missing. And what happens is often that person will begin to realize that there's a whole inner dimension of life, a whole inner universe to explore, and they begin to awaken more to a spiritual life. and they begin to do what is called in the ancient literature the reversal of the wheel. And they begin to incarnate in the other direction, because you're going clockwise before you wake up. You're going counterclockwise through the zodiac over many, many incarnations when you're on the path. It's like the corkscrew is coming back out the way it came in, okay? And that turning point is Libra. And Uranus is the planet that creates radical reorientation. Many of you know this, right? So in that light, it makes a lot of sense that Uranus would be the higher ruler of it. Okay? Look, if you're Libran, that doesn't mean that this is the incarnation you're reversing the wheel. You may have done it several incarnations ago, but you will revisit Libra, we all do, many times. But if it is the time of your incarnational journey where you are reversing the wheel, you're going to have Libra really strong in the chart. Okay? Okay. All right. Scorpio. Scorpio, Scorpio. All right, here's Scorpio and the higher sense. Discipleship that is demonstrated through the transformation of the shadow. Scorpio, friends, is called, in the ancient literature, it's called the sign of the test. The sign of the test. But it's also called the sign of discipleship, because it's in Scorpio where the disciple has to prove his or her fitness to serve the greater life. Because in the spiritual community out there, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. You got to prove yourself. You got to do the hard work and you got to prove yourself. Every one of us. And what I'm about to share with you is so important to all of you. Because even though Scorpio is the sign of the test, because it's the sign of the test, it's also called the sign of discipleship. That's another title for it. And everybody who's on the path, everybody who's awakened to their own duality, everybody who's striving to lift themselves to that higher note realizes that they have to do the hard work of transforming the lower to do it. Every one of you, if you're spiritually oriented, you're being ruled by Scorpio from a certain perspective. Now, if you're on the path and you have it strong in the chart, it's an accented theme. But if it's really about all of us, okay? So the natural question, though, is, what's the nature of the test? Now, life is testing, but look, that's going to be true with anybody. Everybody has tests of life. The real test is to see how willing you are to look deep inside yourself to find the thing you hope you won't find but must. In other words, the search for the shadow deep within. The search for the shadow. And redemption of the shadow. That's why Scorpio is the sign most associated with psychology. It rules the whole department of psychology. Because in a way, that's what a therapist does, you know, a psychotherapist. They're looking deep. You know, I used to be a psychology teacher many years ago at a university in California. And we used to talk about, with students back in those days, this is a long time ago, but we used to talk about the old analogy of the onion, you know? What's behind that layer? What's behind that? What's behind that? But when you're on the path and you're Scorpion, it means you should be the therapist and the client at the same time. You see? Pulling back your own layers. What's going on? And I like to quickly share with you a very meaningful story that may help you understand this. You know, this is a story that it goes back about, probably about 2,500 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago. And it's a story in Greek mythology having to do with Hercules. Hercules. Now, in Greek mythology, Hercules was a hero figure. And there's this ancient story about Hercules had to go through 12 tests to prove himself. But one of those tests, what we realize is that when we really look at that journey of these 12 tests, we realize it's actually a metaphor for the journey of the soul around the 12 signs of the zodiac. Amazing. And it's beautiful. And what I do, I want to share with you the Scorpio labor, okay? Now the way that labor goes is this. Hercules, he symbolizes the striving disciple, so that's all of us, you and me. You're the striving disciple. He's approached by the presiding one. Now, the presiding one is just a reference to the inner master. And he's been told to go out into this land where there's this horrible dragon that lives. And this dragon has 9 heads, and each head breathes fire. And it's called the 9-headed Hydra. And he's been told to go find it and slay it. Okay? Well, that dragon is a metaphor for the shadow inside. And every head of that dragon is said to be a facet of the shadow. Maybe one head is pride. Maybe another envy. Maybe another fear. And I always am a little bit confused about this because I always think, how did they get 9? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if 900 is more accurate for most of us. But okay, we'll go with the 9. So off he goes with courage to find this dragon, which is introspection, looking inside. And the story goes, at first he can't find it. He's looking everywhere, he cannot find it. And then he starts to smell something putrid. And he thinks to himself, maybe I better follow my nose. So he follows this smell for 7 miles. And he comes to this disgusting swamp. And he thinks to himself, I'll bet that dragon lives around here. And he looks across the pond and he sees a cave on the other side of the pond. And he peers into the cave and he sees the rump of the dragon. And he says to himself, aha, I found the enemy, but now I've got to wake it up because I've been told I have to slay it. So he yells at the dragon, but it doesn't wake up. So then he takes a log and he throws this log and he hits it, but still it doesn't wake up. And then he takes a boulder, this is Hercules, he can do that. And he throws this boulder and hits it. And still it doesn't wake up. So he begins to think, this is a threat? This is a problem? Nonsense. Maybe it's just some silly fable from long ago. I'm out of here, I'm leaving. But then he remembers that the presiding one gave him a special weapon. Maybe he should use that first. And it was a bow with a quiver of arrows. So he loads up one of the arrows, aims and fires and hits the dragon, and boom, it wakes up and it's furious and it pivots right around. And if the dragon could speak, it would say, who dare disturb my sleep? So I've got to stop right there for a moment because that is such a critical part of the story. Because you see, in the mythology of it, those arrows have a name. They're called the arrows of aspiration. And that's crucial. Because what it means, friends, is this. It is only when we truly aspire to live according to our higher promptings that that's what wakes up the dragon in any of us. You know, there's something about the more you strive to that higher, wiser part of yourself, the more you become aware of everything inside you that seems to prevent you from getting there. And that's the dragon. Or the Christian might call it the devil within. Or Carl Jung, the psychologist, would call it the shadow. And in esotericism, it's called the dweller on the threshold. So for the masses of people out there, sleeping dragons, it's running the show. But for the disciple, should be wide awake. You know, I teach this philosophy in 9 countries around the world. I have a lot of students. And I tell everybody, I said, look, if you don't see your dragon, there's something wrong. I mean, if you're really, really striving to live from your higher nature, you should be aware of the things inside you that get in the way. You see? So just quickly, I'll tell you how the story ends with Hercules on this one. This dragon comes thrusting across the pond to attack him, and one of the heads breathing fire comes down to get him, and he takes out a sword and he cuts off the head. But then to his surprise, 2 sprout where one was. And he goes, oh shit. Or perhaps the Greek equivalent of oh shit. Okay? And then another head comes down, cut, sprout, cut, sprout, cut, sprout. So this is getting bigger and bigger and stronger and stronger. And he's falling back in dismay and fatigue. He's never lost a battle before, and he's losing big time here. Well, what does that mean to any of us? It means that you can't deal with your dragon in conventional ways. None of us can. You can't repress it. You can't cut it out of you. You can't deny it, nor can you project it. You know what projection is? I see it out there because I can't see it in myself. But often a person will go through all of those things. It doesn't work. Sometimes makes it much worse. Okay? So then what happens is, as he's falling back in dismay, he suddenly remembers something. He remembers that when he left on the journey long ago, the presiding one leaned over and whispered a clue in his ear. And he had forgotten until that moment. And the clue was this: we rise by kneeling, we gain by yielding. That was the clue. And at that moment he realized his mistake. And he drops his armaments, and he kneels in supplication to this hideous creature, which, remember, is just a part of himself. But in the kneeling and the yielding, a flashing intuition crossed his mind that he'd never had before. And that was to reach down under the hydra into the mud, and with his mighty strength, lift it out of its rootedness in matter and hold it high into the sunshine. And that's what he did. And to his surprise, the whole thing began to shrivel up and die right in his hand. In that story, the sun, the light of the sun, is symbolic of the light of the soul itself. It's all about learning that the more you can lift your consciousness to a higher place deep inside you, the more the soul itself can begin to repattern the dragon's patterns of consciousness and transform it. I remember many years ago, one of the countries I teach in is New Zealand, and maybe 15 years ago I created a whole meditation for that group based upon identification of a dragon head you want to work on and how to bring it in deep into meditation and have your higher consciousness over time slowly repatterning it and transforming it. That's why, by the way, this is the great sign of transformation. Transformation of the shadow. Here's the mantra: warrior I am, and from the battle I emerge triumphant. But it's a warrior over your lower nature. It's a warrior over your shadow issues. Scorpio is a tough sign, friends. It's a tough sign. But it's also the sign of the fast track. You evolve faster through Scorpio than any other sign. It's just a bit more painful. Okay? Ruling planet. Traditional ruler is Pluto. Esoteric, well, the highest ruler, I'm going to use the highest ruler here for a reason, is actually Mercury again. In that case, the story itself has it. In the case of when Hercules was trying to kill it with the sword, that's Mars and Pluto. When he gave up the sword of Mars and Pluto, what happened? He had a flashing intuition into his mind. That's Mercury. You see? Even in the story, we see the transition from Mars and Pluto to Mercury. Okay? Sagittarius, anybody in here? Okay, we got some Sagittarius. All right. Here it is. The quest for meaning and the aspiration to strive toward one's vision. Look, Sagittarius is an interesting sign. It really is. You know, it's the archer, right, who's shooting the arrows. And what's so interesting about Sagittarius is that, by the way, those arrows are the same. The arrows of aspiration. In the story of Scorpio, that labor of Hercules is actually about how your shadow is revealed because you're aspiring, but in Sagittarius itself, it's literally about aspiration. It's literally about vision. Sagittarius is always spiritually about visioning of, aspiring toward, aiming at. But it's a sign that, you know, it's in traditional astrology even, it's said to rule philosophy and religion and travel on a more mundane level. But on a higher level, of course, it's the travels of the mind. And there's a strong curiosity factor in Sagittarius. I think what else I'd like to say is this about Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sign where the key to success is to have a steady aim. Because one of the great challenges of Sagittarius is that because the curiosity factor is so strong, many Sagittarians, instead of aiming right at their vision, they aim like this. Oh, what about, whoa, 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 shooting arrows all over the place. And so many Sagittarians, if they're not careful, they never get to their vision because they are victimized by unbridled curiosity. In some of the ancient literature, a great master once said this: the Sagittarian disciple must learn to become the one-pointed disciple. One-pointed, going right to the vision. Not to the right of it, not to the left of it, but right to the vision. And in a way, you become the arrow itself. It's as if the wholeness of the life is impassioned toward a singular vision in service to humanity. Of course, the vision has to be that. Whatever your spiritual purpose is, if it's not about upliftment of something beyond yourself, then it's not soulful, it's personality-based. And then one-pointed, one-pointed. Okay? Now, it too has a sacred mantra. Let me show you that. I see the goal, I reach the goal, and then I see another. Too many Sagittarians modify it. I see the goal, but hey, look what just crossed my path. I think I'll check it out first. Steady as she goes, steady as she goes, steady the aim. Okay? Okay? And when the Sagittarian can steady the aim and really, really commit themselves with one-pointed focus, they can move mountains. Okay? All right. I'm picking up the pace a little bit. The next sign, ruler. Traditional ruler is Jupiter. But the esoteric ruler, this will really surprise you, is the Earth itself. Which is an amazing thing, because traditional astrology doesn't even use the Earth. And I think, wow, what an oversight. Huh? What an oversight. The Earth is a living entity. Why wouldn't it have some kind of rulership relationship? But what that really means is that when you're really going to live a spiritual life in Sagittarius and aim to the vision, it means you have to literally remain grounded enough and really kind of walk the talk in a true way on Earth, in realness. You know, these three signs are really important. The three in a row: Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn. Scorpio is called the valley experience, where you have to go into the desert and deal with the shadow. That is said that you rise up out of the valley and you hit the plains, and the plains is Scorpio. Is Sagittarius, is Sagittarius. And you have to walk straight toward the vision. Not like this, but right like that arrow. That's why, by the way, Sagittarius is said to be the astrological energy that rules the path. It rules the path. And take you right to the mountain, and that becomes the mount of initiation, actually. So you got the valley, the plains, and the mountain. Those three together are just crucial in your understanding of your journey. And you'll get clarity more when I talk about Capricorn in a moment. So that's the ruler of it, okay? Okay. Everybody still with me? I know it's kind of deep, but hang in there, hang in there. So where are the Capricornians in here? Okay. So, you know, the thing about Capricorn is that it gets a bad rap out there, really. I mean, really. Usually people think about Capricorn, they go, oh, those greedy businessmen, you know, those filled with ambition, oh, you know. But you know, Capricorn, the symbol is the mountain and the goat climbing the mountain. And the mountain itself is one of the most important symbols in that, because you see, the mountain symbolizes hierarchies. Hierarchies. And that's why in traditional astrology it is said that Capricorn rules all hierarchical structures of power within society. It rules the business world because it's hierarchical. It rules government because it's hierarchical. It rules the military because it's hierarchical. But its assumption, or the attitude, is that, you know, it results in a lot of personality, ego-driven stuff. It's called the sign of ambition. And indeed, the mountain in Capricorn it's been sometimes called the Mount of Ambition. But here's the big secret, friends, that traditional astrology doesn't know. There's actually 2 mountains in Capricorn, not 1. And the other mountain is the mountain that is you attend to if you're on the path in Capricorn. And that mountain, the climbing of it, has a different set of rules. And it's called the Mount of Spirit. It's also called the Mount of Consciousness. All of us, in a way, are climbing an inner mountain. We're trying to lift ourselves to a higher, wiser perch, where we have a broader, more wise, more inclusive view. We're climbing an inner mountain. The evolution, when we say we raise our consciousness, we might be saying we're lifting our consciousness to a higher place on this mountain. And very quickly, I'd like to give you a quick kind of analogy of how to understand it from the climbing of a real mountain. This inner mountain is the high point. The top of that inner mountain represents the high point of consciousness that a person could reach and hold. And so kind of keep that in mind. And I'm just going to very briefly share with you the idea of climbing a mountain and something to think about, realizing I'm using it as a metaphor for the inner mountain. So for instance, one of the big lessons the Capricornian disciple learns is this, that when you climb a real mountain, and I realize I'm in Illinois, there doesn't seem to be many. Okay. I'm from Oregon, there's a bunch of them, but not here apparently. Okay, so when you climb a real mountain, the lower levels of the mountain is where it's easiest. It's where it's not as steep. That's where the meadows are. That's where the babbling brooks are, and the butterflies. But then later it gets steeper. So one of the big lessons you learn in Capricorn is you discover that the beginning of the spiritual path is the easiest, but then it gets tougher as you go. Saturn is the traditional ruler, and it's the esoteric ruler, so we got that handled. It's one of those signs that it's both, okay? Another lesson you learn in Capricorn is this, that Capricorn, to really succeed spiritually, it's important that you realize that a short step in the correct direction of your evolution is wiser than a big step that might be slightly off course. Capricorn is a slow, methodical, step-by-step process. A goat is a sure-footed animal, and so must be the disciple in Capricorn. And there's wisdom behind it. You know, sometimes when you climb a real mountain, sometimes you climb up into a fog bank, and now you can't even see where you're going. That's kind of like the path sometimes, you know? Sometimes you really think I know my purpose, this is my purpose, and then other times you say, well, geez, I thought I knew, but now it's not clear, I'm not sure. And what if there's a switchback right in front of me? There's this idea that slow, cautious movement. Capricorn people, more than any other type, but this is actually true for everybody in the path, it's in the last third of the life where the disciple should make his or her finest contribution in terms of human betterment. Even though the world says you're in your prime in your 30s and 40s, that's only from a personality point of view. From the soul's point of view, it's the last third of the life. And that's very true with Capricorn, and it's generally true with anybody on the path. Now, on the Mount of Capricorn, when a person begins the transition, if they're serious about their development, so we're talking about a serious, disciplined, it's a disciplined approach. When you have that person, they're getting close to entering the last third of the life. In astrology, we mark that as the transition, the second Saturn return. Usually it's right around 58 to 60-ish, right in there. Okay. You move into part 3 of the 3-part act. And it is a way of understanding it is on the Mount of Capricorn, at that point there's what is called the plateau. And the plateau is a pause point. And 2 things happen on the plateau. First, there's a looking back and a recollection of the things the hard work that it's been to develop yourself and get here. But there's also a looking up and a recognizing that the top of the mountain is so close, it's almost as if you could touch it, meaning you feel so close to coming into the fullness of your higher consciousness. And so the top of the mountain it seems like you're almost there, but a stark revelation happens at that point. Because you realize that though now the climb and the development is going to be the shortest, it will also be the steepest. So a very difficult decision is made on the plateau on the Mount of Capricorn. You realize that the only way you can continue the journey upward from here is that you have to drop the excess dross of life, whatever's weighing you down. And people have a lot of different kinds of dross. Some people have relationship dross, some people have financial dross, some people have obligatory dross, whatever it is. In the ancient literature, we're told that the Capricornian disciple, to make it to the very top, he or she must free themselves from the binds that limit the life. And if they do, if that goat continues to climb and really does get to the top, we're told in mythology that that goat is transformed into a unicorn. And the symbolism is beautiful. 2 horns. One horn is said to be the horn of the soul, the other is the horn of the personality, and now they're fused as one horn of loving will thrusted to heaven. The triumphant unicorn at the top of the Mount of Capricorn. And in mythology, a unicorn was said to be a symbol of perfection, a symbol of spiritual enlightenment, a symbol of Christ consciousness. And in a way, when we're talking about getting to the top of the mountain, you're kind of fully coming into your soul nature. Spiritual initiation and the will to achieve on behalf of the soul's purpose is the main theme. My apologies, I should have showed you this earlier. Spiritual initiation, because Capricorn rules all initiations. All initiations. At the top of the mountain, whatever. By the way, every life you get a taller mountain. Okay. All right. So, having that in mind, and I want to make sure that you, if you're writing notes, you get this. Here is the mantra that I want you to see. Because it's at the top of the mountain where the mantra for Capricorn is most relevant, although it does have relevance on the way up. Lost am I in light supernal, yet on that light I turn my back. It's very enigmatic. But what it's trying to say is this. The word supernal is a word you don't hear too often, but it means divine. Like the light of God is said to be supernal light. But the light of your own soul is also called supernal light. And now you're at the top of the mountain and you feel like you're really living the fullness of your higher consciousness. It's a good lost. I'm there. I don't feel like I have to strive to become something higher than I'm at. This is my high water mark, and all I want to do is merge into the all. But then something interesting happens. We're told that the disciple, while lost in light supernal, starts to hear something, and when listening closer realizes that it's a cry, and when listening even closer realizes it's a cry coming from the bottom of the mountain, and it's the cry of suffering humanity. So what happens is the disciple at the top of the mountain will eventually do what is called the pivot on the pedestal, and will make a 180-degree pivot and turn, and commit to carrying the light of love and the light of wisdom down the mountain, into culture, into civilization, and make a practical, uplifting contribution to the betterment of something. You see, Capricorn is one of the signs that's trying to cultivate what we call the practical mystic, the capacity to inwardly reach for the stars and keep your feet on the ground. You see, you are the mountain, friends. The high point of the mountain, the top of the mountain, simply represents the high point of consciousness that you can reach and hold. And the bottom of the mountain is the world of practical service. Lost am I in light supernal, yet on that light I turn my back. Martin Luther King was Capricorn. And he said, I've been to the mountaintop. He knew. Okay? I'm running out of time. I got to pick up the pace. I got 2 signs to go. Ready? With the next, you got this, you got the rulers, okay? The next sign is, of course, Aquarius, right? Here's the theme for Aquarius. The giver of life through a recognition of the unity underlying diversity. Aquarius is a sign that has everything to do with unconventional thinking. It has a lot to do with thinking something from outside the box, so to speak. Aquarius has everything to do with being willing to stand on the fringe. Because you see, Aquarius is the other sign of the zodiac that has to do with sensing the new paradigms on humanity's horizon and to be a voice in support of those new and emerging paradigms. Remember, Aries was the other one that was very much, I see the new paradigm. Aquarius and Aries are the visionary pioneer energies. However, they tend to do something different with it. Aquarius says, I see the new vision and I want to bring it out to the world and I'm going to find people to collaborate with to do it. Where Aries says, I see the vision and like it or not, I'm going to bring it forward even if it's by myself. Both of them are powerful and both of them, but one's more group-oriented and one says, I'm going to do this by myself if I have to. Aquarius is also the sign that helps condition your consciousness with a capacity to see the oneness of all things, the oneness of humanity. But it does it by recognizing that underlying that unity is diversity. In other words, Aquarius is amazing. It basically helps you see humanity's oneness through diversity. The other signs can help you see oneness, but it's often through sameness, not Aquarius, it's through differentness. So it's a very, very progressive sign, and it's the sign of the future. And all of us, in a certain sense, are very much trying to live Aquarian lives. We're not fully into the age of Aquarius. We're in a big overlap period. It's about 200 years. We won't be fully in Aquarius without any Pisces at all till the year 2117. So we're in the big conflict. We have two signs of the zodiac that are overlapping and shaping the collective consciousness of humanity, which is one of the underlying reasons why there's such a crisis in the world today and great polarizations. There's a few other reasons, but I can't get into it right now. Let's not go down that road. Okay. Here's the mantra. Water of life am I, poured forth for thirsty men. Water of life am I. It's not waters of emotion. The water bearer, he's not bearing water as an emotion. It's called the waters of life. Aquarius is a great life-giving sign. It's also the sign of universality. It is the hope of the future because where humanity is right now, we're trying to figure out as a humanity how to be one. That's what's struggling now. The big crisis in the world, underlying it all, is the struggle to figure out how do we live as one. And because of the complexities of society today, we could only do that through an honoring of diversity. How else could it be done? And here the very sign that represents it is meeting us at the same time that that's what we need. And that's not an accident. That's the synchronization between the cosmos and the evolution of the planet and the earth. So just realize that this is important for all of us, Okay, I got to pick up the pace, one more sign to go. The traditional ruler is Uranus, and the esoteric ruler is Jupiter. Jupiter. Thank goodness. Wow, what a great planet to have as a spiritual ruler. Okay, Pisces. Pisces, the power to save through the demonstration of sacrificial love. Any Piscean people in here? Oh, got quite a few. Okay. Well, Pisces is one of the Christ signs, as I said, very, very Christ-oriented. And usually people who are on the path, who are in Pisces, they go one of two ways. They either go the way of creativity, because it's a very creative sign, because it facilitates sensing the subtle. It facilitates the imaginative faculty. That's why it's even traditionally associated with things like dreams, intuition, psychism, those sorts of things. Mystical yearning. But many people go the other way, the way of sacrificial love. Pisces is the sign that often will shape human consciousness with a sensitivity to where there's real suffering in the world, where there's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness and despair. It's a sign that it's got a couple other names. It's been called the sign that has the deepest downward reach, meaning the capacity to really, really bring love into difficult places. It can attend to the underbelly of society. It's also called the sign of the saving force. There's a bit of a rescue energy with Pisces. That's why Pisces, even in traditional astrology, rules things like social work. So Pisces is a very, very important sign. Even though we're going out of the Piscean age, the truth is the best of Pisces better be carried into the Aquarian age or we're in trouble. So Pisces is so much about bringing love into difficult places and being a transformer. Because there's a recognition that we're all one, but there's also a recognition that people are falling through the cracks because of the imperfections of human culture and civilization. And yet we're all one. We all have to move through the door of initiation together. The last weary pilgrim must come home. And this particular group of people are uniquely framing their consciousness in a way that can attend to those who are falling through the cracks. Here's the mantra. I leave the Father's home, and turning back, I save. I leave the Father's home, and turning back, I save. Really quickly, I'll just clarify what that means. You remember earlier when I talked about, I was in Virgo and I told you about the cosmic father and the cosmic mother? Remember I told you the cosmic father was all about will? Well, so is your soul. Your soul, your causal body, has it has a father energy at its core, and it has a mother energy of loving intelligence. Now, Piscean people, when they go inside themselves, they're really comfortable with finding the mother. They really sense that loving, natural, intuitive intelligence, and that's what causes them to serve. But that's also what causes them to be victimized by their own hearts. That's the downside of Pisces. Many Piscean people, you know, they always want to give a hand and everybody demands an arm. You know, it's a social worker who burns out because it's a thankless job. Many Piscean people, they're people that often will become victimized by their hearts. And they are people that are that need to find more of the will energy in them, the will, the power, the father in them. And what I like to do is always when I meet a Piscean, when I do private one-on-one work, I always tell the Piscean, look, it's important to get into a deeper relationship with the father because you got the mother thing down. And the father is deep inside you, but you don't see it. So I always give them a clue of where to find the father deep inside. And I always say, look, if you want to find the father deep inside, he's hidden behind the mother inside. If instead of feeling that just that loving connection to Christ and love that the Piscean person is so naturally able to do, push deeper, go deeper. If you go deep enough, you will come to a point where you will feel or find a place of focused, immovable will. And that's Dad. And then from that place, outward turn. And then capture the love that's come so naturally. And move into the world of service as the saving force, but now with both the father and the mother. Because you see, the mother is fantastic for creating unity, for healing, for mending wounds, for conveying wisdom, but it's terrible when it comes to defining boundaries, knowing right direction, and saying no. It's terrible at that, because that's the role of the father energy in you. That's one of the functions of the father in each of us. Define boundaries, define right purpose and direction, and know how to say no. So in closing, I'll say this to the Piscean. It's like we're all sailboats. And love is the wind that fills the sails. But the father must control the rudder. And many Piscean people have wind-filled sails, but are rudderless. You start getting the father energy in you. You just go deeper to where there's a profound sense of will. You get acquainted to the Father, and then you carry both into the world, and you truly become a servant on behalf of the inner ashram and the work of the Christ. I took this thing later than I was supposed to. The traditional ruler is Neptune. The esoteric ruler is Pluto. In Pluto, the reason for Pluto as the esoteric ruler, you saw Pluto in the sign of Scorpio, and Pluto is called the dredger. Pluto is the planet that takes you down to find your shadow in Scorpio and helps you see it. and it says, hey, you might want to take a look at this. Pluto in Pisces is the shadow of society. It's bringing up the shadow of society, the underbelly of society, in service to dealing with that shadow. Okay?
You originally said there's 3 rulers. You gave us one. What do the other 2 signify?
There's another tier above it that I didn't get into. It's called the hierarchical levels of rulers, and that pertains to people that have reached what we call initiate consciousness and mastership. So it has nothing to do with you and I yet. But some incarnation they will. Okay?
So what happens when you have the same sign as sun sign and rising sign?
Okay, well, so everybody heard the question? Okay. There's a plus and a minus to that. The plus is that the rising sign can often represent the soul's deeper intention, as I said, and the birth sign can often represent the personality nature that it needs to express through. Now, when they're the same sign, the good news is that means that there's a natural relationship, natural energetic affinity between the two. The downside to that is that it's harder to distinguish one from the other. If they're different signs, it's sometimes clearer to recognize which is the soul note and which is the more day-to-day consciousness note. So there's a plus and a minus, yeah.
At the beginning, you said something about the rising sign.
Yes.
And its importance in relation, not in relationship to, but as opposed to the birth sign.
Right.
Does that mean that all of this that we talked about the birth sign, has less of an influence than the rising sign?
Okay, yeah, let me try to, I'm going to make it a simple little model for you to think about, okay? Let's say that your birth sign, I'll make this up, let's say your birth sign is Virgo, okay? Now there's day-to-day regular Virgo, the usual understanding, more personality-based Virgo, and then there's the higher Virgo I said, okay? Now let's say that your rising sign is Sagittarius, okay? And that there's this higher Sagittarian quality that I said was very connected to your soul's purpose. If you're Virgo, and your day-to-day Virgo consciousness is there, it means that to lift yourself from the lower Virgo to the higher Virgo requires that you engage the higher rising sign to facilitate that process. You get that? Okay. All right.
Okay, so my ascendant is the opposite of my sun sign.
Okay.
And I have like 5 planets in my sun sign for Scorpio.
Uh-huh.
So I have pretty strong Scorpio characteristics, but I'm supposed to bring out characteristics of the opposite sign.
Well, there's truth to that too. Always the opposite sign has some clues or antidotes to the problem of the sign. So yeah, in fact, Taurus would be, getting the best of Taurus helps you transform the negative aspects of Scorpio. Yeah, true. And it's true for everybody. Whatever your opposite is, there's something about it that can actually help you move forward. Yeah.
Okay, and one more. Is there any merit being born like in between signs? So you call them like born on a cusp, something like that? Merit?
Yeah. Did you say any merit?
Yeah.
Merit. No, but that happens. It happens, and usually astrologers have different views of this. But usually, you know, if it's within 2 degrees or so, 3 degrees, that's considered cuspal, which means that even though you're technically in one sign, you're going to have quite a bit of the influence of the neighboring sign. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, makes sense.
Great. Yeah.
We had a question online about what is reversing the wheel. So if you would like to address that.
Well, it's reversing the wheel. What I was saying, trying to say, and I was quick with it, but your soul will incarnate in a direction around the zodiac for thousands of lifetimes. It doesn't mean it's one, then the next, then the next, then the next. What it means is, energetically, there's a trend of one direction and a trend of the opposite direction. Before you're on the path, before you have your awakening, your consciousness, your soul will incarnate on the forward direction of the wheel, the clockwise direction of the wheel. and that's involuting. So, and that's all about getting deeper into matter, deeper into form, more identification with mental, emotional, and physical substance to ultimately build the ego of your personality, which is necessary before you even wake up to the soul. But then you satiate yourself at a certain point, and that's when I was talking about Libra as being the place where you can reverse the wheel, and then you start energetically moving around the other direction, not one at a time, but see it as a flow of pattern of exiting as the corkscrew pulls out of the cork. And when you're fully pulled out of the cork, actually you're given another name. You're called the Master, enlightenment.